Hello, I'm Jacob Feldman.
And I'm Eben Novi-Williams, and this is the dream finals matchup, sports business podcast, the Sporticast. Jacob, what a finals for MLS. I think if you could have asked folks around the league, not team folks, they'd pick their own team. If you could have asked MLS what the dream MLS finals looked like, Leo Messi and Inter Miami is definitely in that. And given the success that Vancouver has had with Thomas Müller, and they're on the market as well, which we can talk about, a rare team to reach the finals of their league championship while also being sold. This works out pretty darn well for MLS from a viewership, both in the US, I think, and also internationally.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about that international opportunity. I think LAFC is probably in the mix. They lost the conference semis and penalty kicks, and they obviously have Youngmin Son, who's another massive international star. But yeah, they'll take this matchup for sure. And it's one of my pet fascinations that I spend way too much time thinking about is scheduling. And so I'm always fascinated
Jacob's
to see
pet fascination.
Yeah, my pet fascination corner this week is postseason scheduling. And so this match 2:30 p.m. on a Saturday. And so I think thinking about what goes into that, there's a couple things. One is it's a big day of college football. So last year this was up against the SEC final, I think at 3:30 or maybe 4. So they've slid it up a little earlier to avoid that direct confrontation. I think they're going up against the Big 12 championship instead, which is BYU Texas Tech, which is maybe not as much of an overlap with soccer fans, and especially in Vancouver and Miami. So that works out better. And then, as you mentioned, the international thing is really interesting because 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, U.S. is obviously prime time in England and Spain and Germany, and a lot of these markets where I'm sure the MLS would like to grow or at least have some footprint. And it's also, we can talk about the schedule flip and kind of what that's going to mean for playoffs, which I think domestically are going to be in a better spot in April, May compared to the middle of football season. But internationally, this December window, I think, is pretty good. I mean, we're deep into the season, but there isn't a lot of major competitions going on globally. So yeah, I'm really fascinated. We won't get exact numbers, but fascinated to at least try to track anecdotally what kind of viewership they're able to build for this internationally.
Yeah, I feel like you could make an argument that this is maybe the worst weekend of the year to have a big MLS game, right? You've got a full slate of NFL games on Sunday. So Sunday is basically off the table. And then you have not a full slate of college football, but the biggest non-playoff college football weekend, and one in which there is games in there's big kind of banner games in every single time slot. Yeah, this is and there's no easy answer here if this is when you have to have your championship. And I don't know how much, obviously MLS wants sports casual fans, and getting Messi in the championship game is going to lure more of them than typical. But I do wonder how much of the SEC or Big 12 watching populace is in play even for the best matchup that you could have, or one of the best matchups you could have, or if really the growth potential here is for people that wouldn't be watching either typically, that might watch this MLS game, or as you said, people who are in Germany who have been Müller fans for the last 20 years, or people who are in Europe who love Messi, that you are suddenly kind of bringing in to be watching a game that they might not watch if it was Red Bulls versus Rapids.
Right. And, not to go full TV scheduling nerdery, but I don't know what the lead in is really what's critical. And we didn't even mention that this game is going to be on Fox in addition to Apple TV. And so that's where you're going to draw in that average viewer. So whether it's flipping over, what's more valuable than the channel flipper or the casual fan who stumbles upon it is the lead in and the lead out. And so Fox will have the Big Ten game that evening, but that's obviously not going to be connected. So I'm guessing they're going to have a pregame show at noon and then something short before this 2:30. Anyway, without getting too deep into it, it's obviously they'll probably get some people flipping over from football, but I would imagine the larger majority would be people who have been advertised this game in one form or another in the build-up.
So let's talk Messi for a second. He has 1 year left, right, on his 2.5-year contract. It was a $150 million deal. It broke kind of all sorts of records across MLS. The biggest signing in the history of this league by a very wide margin. There were some owners, I talked to a few of them back when this was kind of rumored or hadn't fully been locked in yet, who were a little skeptical about whether this was the best use of $150 million for the league for Inter Miami. I think right now, Jacob, tell me how you feel, but it feels to me like this has been a huge success, and it came kind of on the heels of or in conjunction with this Apple deal. We can talk about Messi's unique contract structure, and I use contract as a loose term for all of the things that apparently were rolled out to him as part of his transfer to America. But yeah, you can find maybe some things to doubt about MLS's growth and things like that. But I think the Messi portion so far, at least, has been a big success, and getting him into a championship game on the eve of the World Cup, 2 days or 1 day after the World Cup draw is happening in America. I do think it lines up quite well for Major League Soccer.
Yeah, that's another great point. I hadn't really even put those together. I don't know how much publicity they're going to be able to pump into that event. But
I can tell you that
beyond that.
Yeah. So the MLS is doing an event in DC. The World Cup draw is in DC on Friday. MLS is doing an event
featuring
the
Village people, I think,
Thursday, and the day this podcast drops. And that evening, I believe they have over 200 journalists that are set to take part in the MLS thing. I believe Don Garber, the commissioner, is speaking. I think there's a players panel as well. Getting 200 plus international soccer journalists to come to a pre-championship event in a city that's 500 miles away from where the game is being played. It's something that you don't get to do every year, but you get to do it this year because the World Cup draw is happening 24 hours prior to the game. So yes, I think I have been a skeptic on this show about the ways in which the Men's World Cup being in North America, the ways in which that directly ties to benefits for Major League Soccer. This one seems like a pretty clear line to be drawn, right? There is going to be more media attention on MLS in the next 3 days than there would be for a standard championship game, not just because Messi is in the championship game, but also because, again, the nexus of the soccer media world is coalescing around DC 2 days before, a day before the event. I'm sure there's a lot of those people who are then going to make the trip down to Florida to see the MLS Cup final that maybe wouldn't have if they were back home in Argentina or back home in the UK or Asia or Africa, wherever they are based. So this is actually one where I see the direct through line, and that is that is pretty clear to me.
And how much benefit do you see on the flip side of this is a big MLS matchup featuring two global stars in the build up to the World Cup? Is a World Cup benefit, or is in terms of American attention, or is it all one way in your direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, any international soccer with Messi playing, I think, is good for all of soccer, probably, right? And being the World Cup defending champion, and this will certainly be the last few years of Messi's real big professional playing career. I think that benefits. To be honest, I don't think there is a kind of broader World Cup. And I think you and I would probably agree. We've talked about this. It feels like the World Cup is a little muted at this point right now.
Yes,
kind of
all the talk is tickets
North
and
American
visas, and no one's talking soccer yet.
100%. And that will change, obviously, in the next 5 months as we get closer and closer to it. So yeah, is there an argument maybe that like this helps kind of refocus a little bit of America's soccer loving people on the stars and the people that make the game amazing? Yeah, maybe there's some argument to that. But yeah, I think that, as you know, the global soccer population cares a lot more about some other leagues that are still playing and Champions League games that are happening in midweek. And yeah, I don't think that, my guess is that in the global soccer way, I don't think this game moves the needle that much. But to your point earlier, this will be the most watched from an international standpoint MLS championship game ever, I would imagine, and probably by a very wide margin. So none of that it's not nothing, I guess is what I'll say.
And then the last proper noun we have to
go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say
the last proper noun we have to mention is Apple in this as well, and maybe that's where you were going to go as well. We reported a few weeks ago about some changes to their contract with MLS. Games are going to move to Apple TV next year, so they'll be more accessible. And I think one of the things we talked about, not in the story, but probably should have, is it's going to be really interesting to see, tying all these things together, Apple's World Cup play. Obviously, Apple doesn't have World Cup games, but they have this relationship with Messi. They have the relationship with the domestic league that is hosting or is in the country where the World Cup will be played. And so the degree to which Apple can inject itself, because I'm sure they want to inject themselves into all of these proceedings, will be really interesting. They are going to, one of the little things people can watch out for on Saturday is they are going to have some shot on iPhone footage. So I wrote a couple months ago during the end of the MLB regular season that Apple was integrating iPhones into their production, which was a unique thing, and obviously a mix of a marketing opportunity and also a production opportunity. You can put phones in places where you can't put cameras. So they're going to bring that back out for the final on Saturday. And this time they are going to be marked with shot on iPhone, which is their, iconic kind of marketing phrase. And obviously this game's going to be on Fox. So it'll be interesting to see Fox kind of, basically what will in many ways be an infomercial for Apple in this holiday season. It's also going to be a fascinating way as we think about ways in which Apple is monetizing this deal beyond people signing up for a subscription product that no longer exists.
Yeah. And in some ways, correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like the World Cup is exactly the kind of sports that groups like Apple want to get into, right? Which is not like full season long commitments that have dozens and dozens or hundreds of games. And I get it that that's what they did with MLS, but I'm talking kind of more broadly around other leagues and more around these kind of staple tentpole things that are, we talked about, you and I, about eventizing, right? And the way in which the baseball contracts kind of, the new Major League Baseball ones reflect that. But the World Cup, where there is just so much overlap between so much of the global entertainment world, not just the global sports world, feels like it's more the kind of thing that an Apple or an Amazon would care about.
Yeah. And the World Cup, I think in particular, along with the Olympics, comes with this, it's a celebration as much as anything. It's all positivity. It's all, it's a lot of that, which obviously connects with the Apple brand. And so I'm sure they'll be doing shot on iPhone things next year. I'm sure they'll be doing as many documentary type things as they can squeeze out of whatever rights they have to that footage. But that, to me, I think also kicks off this weekend as we start to look towards the ways in which these media companies are activating around World Cup.
So the last thing I want to do on MLS is talk a little about Vancouver, the Whitecaps reaching the championship here. So our colleague Kurt went back through 50 years of major professional sports in the U.S.
Yes, God bless him.
Could find one example of a team that had hired a bank to be sold and won a championship in that process. Did you read his story? Do you know what it is, or do you have a guess?
I don't recall. I remember the Angels made a good run, but I don't remember which one it was that won.
Yeah,
was it the Angels?
You nailed it. It was the Angels.
Great.
So back in 2002, when Disney owned the Angels and the Mighty Ducks, they hired a pair of bankers, Lehman Brothers, led by Sal Galationo, to sell the team. And that was in September of 22. And that same year, they secured the wild card, made a couple of upsets, and then won that 7-game series over the Giants to win the World Series in 2002. Ironically, actually, so they were going to put both the Angels and the Mighty Ducks on the market, and the Mighty Ducks were runners up in the Stanley Cup the following year in 2003. So it almost happened double for the same kind of banker hire transaction. But yeah, it's pretty rare, obviously, for a team. Oftentimes you see the teams that get sold are often the lower performing ones, particularly in a market like this where there's been so much talk around Vancouver relocating. And almost always those are teams that are not particularly good, right? You think about the Athletics, right? Like the Athletics are the type of team that leaves. It's like been bad for a while. Local fans are frustrated. They still love the team, but are frustrated. We had an internal meeting here recently where one of our colleagues asked if this was like Major League, right? Where the female owner is deliberately trying to tank the team, but the team keeps winning. It is not like Major League.
An Apple series in there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is not exactly like that. I think the owners of the Whitecaps very much want this team to win. And I do think that increasingly it feels like this team will probably stay in Vancouver in some capacity, maybe with some ownership staying on, with new blood coming in and new money coming in. They have to fix that stadium situation because they're playing in an indoor football arena that is not good for soccer and not good long term. But I do think that in some ways I think moving the team gets harder if this team is a championship team, right? And that becomes a little bit of a harder kind of public to the extent that owners care. I think that's a harder kind of thing to sell. Is oh yes, it's hard to argue this thing isn't working when you are the best team in Major League Soccer. One little thing I am definitely paying attention to, as in addition to Leo Messi versus Thomas Müller, is kind of what this means for conversations. I don't think the team gets more valuable because it's won a championship. That's just not really the way that these transactions work. But I do think the calculus of the Whitecaps staying in Vancouver or leaving Vancouver, yeah, I do think that there's potentially some consequences in there, given the fact that this team has performed really well and is on the verge of an MLS championship.
Yeah, and just to spell that out, the reason that is confusing to people. Every time we put out our evaluations, people are sometimes confused about why on-field results don't correlate, and I think it's just because this transaction is much more of a longer term vision of what this team looks like in 10 or 15 years, more than the, ticket sales bump you might get for 1 to 3 years by winning. But I do think it helps. Yeah, it definitely can't hurt a team's valuation for sure.
And owners come in with their own intentions and money and thoughts about how to spend on players, right? And
right.
I think the Baltimore Orioles are a good example there, where when that team was purchased by David Rubenstein, they felt like they were on the verge of something amazing, right? The pieces were in place there. And if you could buy any team at that point specifically to try to win a championship in the next 10 years, they would have been pretty high on the list of ones that you think could do that. And I know a number of Orioles fans, I know a number of them are pretty frustrated with the way in which Rubenstein's decision-making and spending tree, et cetera, has not seemed to actually increase the likelihood that the Orioles get to that point, at least in the immediate term. But yes, the on-field, if you're the Yankees or the Warriors and you've been to 15 straight playoffs or whatever, and you have a generational star, all those things do help. But if you are the Whitecaps and you're on the verge of an MLS Cup championship, but who knows where this roster is going to be in 3 years, and there's a lot of turnover and a lot of volatility. Yes, the success of this team this year is not adding tens of millions of dollars to the sale price.
Absolutely. Where do you want to go next? You want to go to WNBA?
Yeah, let's talk WNBA. So I know,
okay.
You've been writing a bit about WNBA, and would you call this news this week or not news this week? But walk us through how you're thinking about another extension in the ongoing labor talks.
Yes, I would categorize this as news. I would categorize it as progress, I guess. It feels like there has been progress made in the last couple of weeks. And again, I think you take everything that's being said publicly and off the record with a grain of salt when it comes to these kind of negotiations. But there seems to be a sense that there is the league has moved to a pay structure that is built in some ways around a share of revenue, and the details there are fuzzy, but I think we've gotten to the point, it sounds like now, where the conversations are around, okay, what revenue is going to be shared, what percent of that is going to go to the players, kind of the details oriented side of this rather than the structure. And again, it's possible that is the league putting forward that they've made progress in a way that the union does not fully view as progress, and there still is a possibility for a work stoppage in a month's time when we get to this next negotiation deadline. But we can get into details if you feel like it's helpful in terms of where things stand. But it does feel like there has been movement towards a deal in the last couple of weeks.
One of the things I saw that I was curious about is it seems like the W is proposing a slight shift in the calendar, the dates of the calendar, which could have implications for some of these upstart off-season leagues that we have seen pop up. What's your read on that? Why owners want it and why players may or may not want it?
Yeah, well, why owners want it is pretty clear. There are more teams. There's a desire for more games, and there's also at the same time a lot of pushback from players about how condensed the calendar is right now. So, and I think Commissioner Engelbert has talked about this before this most recent season about a need to expand the calendar, and it gets tricky on both ends because they currently wrap up at the end of October, beginning of November, and you're again going back to where we started with MLS. You're in the heart of football season. It's a really hard time to hold a championship in the middle of November. And you also have, in many cases, NBA teams that are starting. And so the arenas get more crowded. So there is probably a little room to grow in November, but there's more room to grow at the beginning, which is in April, which has two big conflicts. As you mentioned, one is these other leagues like Unrivaled. To me, at this point in Unrivaled or Project B or some of the international leagues, my assumption would be that they'd be willing to move their schedule around, potentially shorten it
Like they just
a
shift
little
up,
bit.
or okay.
Yeah, shift up, shorten in some sort of way. But it is a challenge for them, and I think it's not lost on people that the executives in charge of Unrivaled are also represented on the union bargain committee. So I wouldn't be surprised if the league is trying to put them in a difficult position and highlight that with some of this. I think that would be a typical bargaining move to try to generate a split there. But the other, to me, more interesting aspects here is the college and the rookie aspect of this, because as you mentioned, the reported most recent proposal would have training camp starting in mid-March, which, as folks know, is March Madness, which is the heart of the NCAA tournament. So when a draft would take place as part of that, and then how quickly those players could join training camp and join the league would be really interesting. The league's popularity growth, inarguably has been driven by rookies entering the league each of the last few years. And so it gets really messy if they're joining mid-season, and how does that going to impact ticket sales and media, and you definitely want to avoid that. And again, Commissioner Engelbart has said she wants to avoid that, but that puts a pretty strict limit on when you can start the season. So, but again, this is a great example of this is kind of a detail that gets sorted out. That we're talking about negotiating within a time frame rather than a philosophical disagreement, I think.
And it's common, as you know, in these negotiations, to toss in something that you aren't serious about wanting, but taking it out of the proposal later on is maybe a bargain. It counts as a bargaining chip, right, or a piece of leverage,
right. And on the other side, the players have put forward that they are trying to get rid of what is the WNBA's version of the franchise tag called the coring system. They're trying to shorten, contracts for rookies. Again, and to me, this is progress, because these are things every time we have a CBA negotiation, these are the issues that we're debating. How early do we need to show up for training camp? How long are our contracts going to be? Some things about housing stipends and retirement benefits, like these, the kind of the bread and potatoes that these labor lawyers are used to negotiating. To me, it's a sign of progress when we start talking about these issues, because that's a quote unquote normal issue to be hashing out.
And anytime there's an extension that's not instead a lockout or a strike, I think does at least imply that there is either progress being made or hope
optimism,
of progress.
At least.
Yeah,
yes,
optimism
exactly.
is the best word there. Yeah, you talking about the condensed schedule from the end of the college season to the start of the W season makes me think about hockey, right? Where some of these guys go from playing in their college season ending to like the next day playing in the NHL. And that's different because that's the end of the NHL season. It's not the beginning of the season, right? So there are it's not a perfect comparison, but it's possible.
And baseball is the wonkiest. Baseball has its draft in the middle of its season, where the records are based on the previous season, and some guys don't join until 9 months later. So exactly. It doesn't necessarily have to be as well coordinated as it is in the NBA and NFL, but it certainly helps.
Yeah. Well, I feel like can you imagine if Caitlin Clark, the day after her season had ended, was playing in a fever game the next day? I mean, in some ways, I think you get.
In some ways, it's great. You
more buzz, and I'm sure it's not fun for Caitlin or her coach or her teammates, but you would get, I think, this kind of secondary or cascading effect of publicity that might not actually be bad for fans or bad for the league, just another challenge or hurdle for team chemistry and things like that.
Yeah, just from the GM perspective, I mean, trying to build a roster without knowing who you're going to draft or if they're going to be healthy, it would be fascinating to see as an experiment, but probably something they'd like to avoid if they can. But again, there are only so many months of the year to play in, and so going back to where we started on scheduling, I'm always fascinated to see how leagues kind of sort these things out.
So I want to hit two more points before we wrap up here quickly. Yeah. One. December 3rd, as we're recording this, dropping on December 4th. December 1st was basically the start of the ESPN DraftKings reuniting of their marketing deal. Yes. Obviously, for folks who don't know, ESPN had for a while partnered with Penn National for ESPN Bet. It got out of that deal. Basically, the two sides walked away. It was a big embarrassment, I think, largely for Penn, but I don't think it looked great for ESPN either. And in its place now, we have ESPN and DraftKings as this huge marketing partnership. You, I think, have a very keen eye for the way these things get integrated, what they look like, who's saying what, who's not saying what. What has been your impression through the first few days of this? What stuck out to you? What's different? What's the same, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that's jumped out to me most is that this is a slow build, a quiet start, a soft launch, whatever word you want to use here. Very clearly, as you mentioned, the Penn deal was officially cut short was at the beginning of November or something, roughly a month ago. And so what you see now in the app on TV is not the ultimate vision here. There are not odds on games in the app in the way that I expect there to be. This is not as deeply integrated right now. I think when you open the ESPN app, you get a pop up with Kevin Hart saying sign up for DraftKings. Kind of a very, very what I imagine was a more easy to implement integration. But I am curious to see, because I think the instant reaction from a lot of fans when they heard ESPN Bet was going away was, oh great, ESPN's getting out of sports betting, and then within hours, if not minutes, that was clearly corrected to, oh no, DraftKings is coming in.
Instead, the new boss, same as the old boss. Yeah.
But I do think this at least gives ESPN and DraftKings a chance to, work from first principles, so to speak, to think about how to actually go about this integration, maybe in a slower, more controlled way, rather than the onslaught that we saw 2 years ago when there was such a rush to get ESPN Bet everywhere.
One question that I think is really interesting, that was a question actually that you surfaced in my mind originally. DraftKings is about to launch its prediction market platform. Fanatics launched this week. FanDuel also about to launch its prediction market platform. Basically, the way all these companies are thinking about it is, in all the states where they do not have a sports book, they would like to have a prediction market. And if and when they launch in a new state, they would take the prediction market offline to put the sports book in. And who knows, maybe not, maybe the opposite if economics shift. But do you have any sense of whether ESPN is also going to be playing in the prediction market world? If we might see two things, if we might see the DraftKings odds and also the DraftKings prediction market, those two things were going to look different, but will probably be mathematically basically the same thing. I can't imagine there's going to be, with the amount of liquidity they're seeing in both, I can't imagine you're going to see massive arbitrage opportunities or a huge disconnect. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm curious if you have any sense of whether odds are going to be the main presentation, if prediction markets and contracts are going to be the main presentation, or both.
Yeah. So we reported that prediction markets are part of this arrangement. They were expressly, part of this deal, part of the conversations. Again, the DraftKings product hasn't even launched yet, so that we're far away from seeing exactly what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I think one of the interesting parts of that, I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine when we're talking about prediction markets being part of this, I imagine that is excluding the other players, Kalshi and Polymarket, from trying to jump in and get promotions before DraftKings launches. So I imagine part of this was like, we are going to launch this product. Don't work with these competitors in X or Y way. It's not going to be a complete blackout. They're still going to have the ability to buy ads, which I'm sure they will do. But they're not going to have that kind of integration opportunity. And yeah, I do think, and you mentioned this, but I do think in a lot of ways the prediction market values, the percentage is easier for people to understand. When you look at an NFL game preview on ESPN.com, it shows you, ESPN predicts a 60% chance for this team to win. B, our fan voting says this team has a 75% chance to win. And a prediction market slots into that a little more easier than minus 350 or 200 or whatever.
Yeah, ESPN got a lot of criticism, I feel like, over the years for it would show the ESPN bet odds next to the whatever the in-house prediction, like likelihood to win bar was. And there was actually oftentimes some differences there. And it would be most noticeable when the spread was really tight and they had a different favorite. So like you can imagine a football game where one team is favored by 1.5 points, but the underdog is 56% to win on the prediction thing. And you're like, oh, wait a second. These two things are saying two totally different things. The thing that I find most interesting about the fact that DraftKings will soon offer both is that it gives ESPN the ability, and I assume this technology exists and will only get more specific, but you could imagine a world where if you're watching ESPN in California and I'm watching in in New York.
Mm-hmm.
You want to show me the sports book odds because that's my DraftKings product. You want to show you the prediction market odds because that's the DraftKings product where you are. You could see
Right.
a world where as it gets easier to target either via kind of local ad spots or via graphics on the screen, if you're doing both, you have the ability to speak directly to wherever this person is about how they can now wager on this thing via DraftKings, whether it's via the sports book or via the predictions product. So yeah, as it gets easier to target specific people where they are with on-screen or kind of in roll ads and things like that. The ability to do both seems like it makes sense.
Right there, that of it, I think it will be interesting to see how they play that, because there's also a legal component of that, of these companies very much saying that these are not substitute or complementary or the same product. And so I'm guessing, and ESPN definitely doesn't want to expose itself to liability without having a real stake in the game. So yeah, it would be interesting to see how they get around the language of that, and maybe it's just an option fans have to toggle it rather than saying that these are the same thing. But that is going to be an interesting element of how aggressive they are about saying you can do this or that depending on where you are.
And to that point, obviously, it's a different regulatory system, right? The sports betting is state by state, gaming regulators. Right. The prediction markets are federal, happening at the CFTC level. So I mentioned earlier that the Fanatics launched its predictions market this week. I spoke with the CEO of Fanatics Betting and Gaming, Matt King, ahead of that launch. And one of the questions I had for him, the Fanatics value prop in gaming has largely been, we have this database of 100 plus million sports fans. They buy t-shirts from us. They buy jerseys from us. They now buy trading cards from us. They buy their memorabilia from us. We have this kind of way to cross-sell across the entire Fanatics ecosystem. And I asked him if it would be easier in what I think of as a less or more lightly regulated prediction market world to really layer those things on. And basically the answer was the opposite. That there are actually maybe more restrictions, and it's why if you look at the Fanatics predictions market app, you're not seeing like sign up now and get a free jersey, and you're not able to use Fan Cash, the Fanatics loyalty currency. You can use that to bet in many places, but you can't use that for prediction markets on the Fanatics Predicts app. So yeah, I think there's to your point, that it's a different regulatory system. In some ways it's more or less restrictive depending, I think, on the area that you're talking about. But yes, a whole nother mess to worry about now is the federal regulation on that side of things.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. I think where it comes to the lack of regulation right now is in the markets that you can create. And so, if DraftKings wanted to get to the point of, is the college football playoff committee commissioner going to mention Alabama's strength of schedule when he's defending them getting into the playoff? That is something you can imagine, a poly market creating a market on, but not a sports book. Or is Travis Kelce going to propose after this game, or even thinking about like the WWE or some of these more these events that traditionally don't, a lot of states don't allow betting on, could have markets around. Really interesting to see what the play is there as well.
Very good transition there, Jacob, to talking about big news that's going to happen on Sunday. The college football playoff committee is going to give its 12 entrants into this into the playoff. Little crystal ball in front of me. I have a talent here. Just going to say, fast forward to Sunday at 12:30. There's going to be a few fan bases out there, Jacob, that are going to be very, very angry. I can't tell you who they are right now. I'll tell you about it next week.
A little murky on that one.
There are going to be some big blue blood fan bases that are going to be very upset, and they're going to be upset that their losses weren't accounted for in the proper way, or their strength of schedule wasn't accounted for in the proper way, or they got dinged too much for playing in a bad conference or not a conference or whatever it is. The expansion of the college football playoff has just expanded the amount of grievance, in my opinion, to a wider group of teams that think that they have the right or have earned the right or have played their way into it. This actually seems like we're sitting here. Obviously the conference championship games are still yet to be played, but some really hard choices here, and basically regardless of what plays out, on Saturday, you basically have a sense of kind of where those battle lines are going to get drawn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure did you see Marco Rubio's comments?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, just kind of off the cuff, making his plea for University of Miami.
If anything, Marco Rubio does is off the cuff, but I appreciate you giving him that benefit of the doubt.
Probably very fair. Yes, as I sit here right now, joking, obviously, there's going to be some aggrieved fan bases, but
yes.
At a time where it does feel like the college sports, we saw this with Lane Kiffin, you and I talked about it earlier this week, that like everybody wants to have a say in this. And when LSU fires its coach and the governor is suddenly up in arms about runaway college football and things like that, I do expect that we are potentially going to hit a different level of outrage again, where people in the government, in cabinet members, local governors, politicians, celebrities. I think that it's easy, it's trendy to rip on runaway college football right now. More people are paying attention to it. More people have their own opinions. It's cool to point to the hypocrisy that is rampant in college football, as if it wasn't rampant in college football for the past 20 years, just in different ways. But yes, if the crystal ball I'm looking into, Jacob, not only says there's going to be angry fan bases out there, but that we may see a different level of frustration and people who think they are in positions of power, thinking about ways in which they can exercise that power to clean up finally this problem that we have in college football.
I think this is the worst thing in American sports. The college football playoff.
What a take. Saving it for the end. What a hot take.
For the people listening to the end, this is it's not just the playoff system's fault. I think it's conference expansion that has made it basically impossible to compare these teams because they're not even playing the same schedule. But it's also, as we mentioned, the brokenness of college football at large and the panic level that makes all these things feel existential. But we've gotten to the point now where these conference championship games are meaningless, if not outright hurtful for those teams playing in it. We've gotten to the point where fans don't want their teams scheduling early season non-conference games because they think it's going to hurt them later in the year. This is, the year 2025, still a smoke-filled room that is, has we get brief comments afterwards, like it's some sort of jury that's been sequestered in a murder trial, and we're trying to piece together exactly why they made this decision, which is just going to lead to conspiracies on top of the conspiracies. And then, as you mentioned, now we have the national government and the president who are using this as a political football, so to speak. And it feels like every year this has gotten worse and worse. And there's endless levels of frustration from basically everybody involved in this process.
I'm going to leave it there, Jacob. I think we're going to go out on you calling this the worst thing in major American
tell me
sports.
I'm wrong. Tell me what I'm forgetting.
I love that. It's hard to argue. You made a good argument.
Find me on Twitter.
I would put basketball down there, but
the sport of basketball.
Maybe that might be my own bias. He is Jacob Feldman. You can find him on Twitter at JacobFeldman4. I am Eben Novi Williams. Find me on Twitter at Novi_Williams. The show is produced by Justin Greenewald. Thank you very much to Justin. And Sporticast social media team crew, which is Carol Winston, Sebastian Milo, and Matt Palacio, would like you to know that you can follow the show at Sporticast, which is the hub of the Sportico Media Network.